Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a biblical fever dream involving an anxious king, a reluctant prophet, and a donkey that, spoiler alert, talks. This is the curious case of the talking donkey, and yes, it's real, it's in the Bible, and no, you probably won't survive this without whisper laughing at least once. Picture it now, a sun-scorched landscape somewhere east of the Jordan River. Dry hills, wind-blown thorns, the occasional startled lizard. The road is dusty, as expected. You're traveling alongside a man with an impressive beard, a strange reputation, and the uneasy energy of someone who's both deeply spiritual and weirdly available for hire. His name? Balaam. And the donkey? Oh, the donkey's coming with us. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're trotting along a winding trade route with Balaam, who's been summoned by a nervous king named Balak. He's the ruler of Moab, and he's very concerned because the Israelites, yes, those Israelites, have set up camp on the edge of his territory. And they're not exactly known for keeping a low profile. Word travels fast in the Bronze Age, and Moab's heard about Egypt, about the plagues, the Red Sea, the recent destruction of neighboring armies. It's giving panic. So Balak does what any politically savvy monarch might do when terrified of a nomadic horde blessed by God. He tries to hire a foreign prophet to curse them. Normal stuff. Balaam, meanwhile, is not your average prophet. He's known for being unusually connected, yet oddly transactional. Scholars still argue whether Balaam was genuinely devoted to Israel's God, or just a skilled freelancer with decent divine reception. Some call him a spiritual mercenary, others a misunderstood mystic caught in a political mess. Either way, you're here now, riding behind him on a borrowed animal with lopsided ears and a tendency to sigh dramatically when she has opinions. Spoiler, she has many. The road to Moab isn't direct. It winds through scrublands and narrow ravines, the kind of route where ambushes used to be common and shade is a luxury. You pass tiny villages where children chase chickens through courtyards, old men squint from stone porches, and women balance pots on their heads like it's just another Tuesday. And the donkey? She's unusually focused. At first, everything seems fine. Balaam mutters prayers, adjusts his satchel, occasionally frowns at the sky like he's waiting for something dramatic to happen. But you notice the donkey's ears twitch at odd intervals. Her hooves hesitate on flat ground. She gives a little snort when the wind changes, as if someone whispered a warning you didn't hear. Animals in the ancient Near East often played symbolic roles. Omens, messengers, even judges in a few odd stories. But this donkey? She's about to become the unexpected soul of this tale. Mainstream historical fact, donkeys were indispensable in this era. Hardy, cheap to maintain, smarter than most give them credit for. Not glamorous like war horses, but more reliable and far more expressive. You start to see that now as her steps slow for no clear reason, as her ears swivel like satellite dishes scanning the unseen. Then something strange happens. The donkey veers off the road, just plop, wanders into a field. Balaam yells, pulls the reins, kicks a sandal at the dust. The donkey flinches but doesn't return. She's not being lazy, she's being careful. You squint at the path ahead, nothing there, nothing visible at least. Balaam grumbles and gets the donkey back on course, but you feel the tension now. The animal is nervous, not spooked by predators. This is different. Like she's avoiding something. Moments later, in a narrow stretch between vineyard walls, she slams to a halt again. This time, you hear Balaam swear under his breath. He beats the donkey with a stick, not viciously, but enough to sting. The donkey bolts, scraping your foot painfully against one of the walls. You wince. Balaam does too. Something is definitely wrong. And not just with the donkey. Somewhere in this stretch of road, invisible to your human eyes, something is standing watch. You don't know it yet, but an angel, sword drawn, is blocking the path. Only the donkey sees it. Only the donkey obeys. And you're just along for the ride. The donkey shudders beneath you, nostrils flaring, ears flat against her head. She's not just being difficult anymore. She's terrified. You can feel it in the way her muscles twitch, in the sudden refusal of her hooves to touch the ground ahead. Balaam is not having it. Again he lashes out, more frustration than cruelty, but frustration's still a dangerous thing when paired with authority. The stick hits the donkey's side with a dull thud, and she jerks her head in protest. You brace yourself, clutching the edge of the saddle blanket as she slams against the wall a second time. Your leg catches again. You let out a hiss of pain. She's not being stubborn. She's saving your life. But you don't know that yet. Somewhere up ahead, between the shifting shadows of olive trees and the heat-glazed dust, the angel waits. Tall, armed, silent, unseeing, and very real. You glance around, trying to figure out what's got your ride so rattled. There's no lion, no snake, no traveler with suspicious sandals. Just that tension again, like walking into a room seconds after a fight and feeling the argument clinging to the walls. Meanwhile, several ridges away, the king of Moab is pacing. Balak is not a patient man. He's had his messengers deliver bribes, make promises, beg. He wants Balaam on sight, wants curses out of his mouth and fire raining down from heaven. But instead his prophet is stuck on a donkey that won't budge because of an angel only she can see. This is not going according to plan. Balak's political fear makes sense, though. Moab's history is complicated. Their borders have shifted like sand dunes. They've been on both ends of conquest and humiliation. And now they're facing a people blessed by a terrifying God who seems to vaporize opposition with casual flair. No wonder Balak wants supernatural backup. Fringe historians point out that Balak's strategy, hiring a foreign prophet to curse his enemies, wasn't unusual for the time. Across the ancient Near East, spiritual professionals were often consulted like consultants. Hi, yes, I'd like a forecast of divine wrath for my geopolitical rival, please. So Balak calls Balaam, and Balaam checks with God first. And what does God say? No. It's not subtle. God tells Balaam in so many words, do not curse these people. They are blessed, which is a pretty strong hint to cancel the trip. And Balaam? He listens. At first, he tells Balak's first delegation to go home, that he can't disobey a direct divine instruction, that even if Balak offered him a palace full of silver, he still wouldn't budge. A pretty noble stance, until the second delegation shows up. This time it's higher-ranking officials, fancier robes, more dramatic eyebrows, bigger offers. And Balaam, he says he'll ask again. This is where it gets tricky. God doesn't change his mind, but he allows Balaam to go, with a warning. You can go, but only say what I tell you to say. And now here we are, on the road, with Balaam caught between a king who wants curses and a God who only deals in blessings. And with a donkey who sees what Balaam cannot, which brings us to now. After the second wall scrape, the donkey limps forward, not fast, not happy, but trying. You can feel her tremble beneath you, but she walks. And then, after a short bend in the trail, she drops to the ground, just collapses, right there. You sprawl sideways, barely catching yourself. Balaam is speechless for a second, and then furious. He hits her again, harder this time. It's like watching someone argue with a locked door. The fury, the disbelief, the utter conviction that this shouldn't be happening, that he should be in control. And that's when it happens. The donkey turns her head, looks Balaam in the eye, and speaks. What have I done to you, she says with perfectly reasonable diction, that you've beaten me these 3 times? You freeze. Balaam freezes. Even the lizards freeze. The only sound is the wind blowing through the reeds and a far-off bleat from a confused goat. Historians still argue whether Balaam's immediate response is the strangest part of this tale. Not the fact that the donkey speaks, but that Balaam speaks back without hesitation. No screaming, no fainting. Just immediate donkey-to-prophet dialogue. "You've made a fool of me," he replies, genuinely insulted. "If I had a sword, I'd kill you right now." To which the donkey responds, "Am I not your donkey which you've always ridden? Have I ever done this to you before?" And Balaam, furrowed brow, dusty robes, sweating under a desert sun, mutters, "No." And that's the turning point. Not the angel, not the curses, not the politics. A single sentence spoken by a donkey with justifiable attitude. You don't see the angel yet, but you feel something shift. You're standing there, still stunned. The donkey's words are hanging in the hot air, totally unbothered by the laws of nature or your expectations of reality. A talking donkey. Not a metaphor, not a dream. Just talking. With logic, with feelings, with receipts. And the wildest part? You're not even that surprised anymore. Maybe it's the heat. Maybe it's the fatigue. Maybe it's that you've reached the point in life where a philosophical livestock intervention actually feels kind of appropriate. Because what the donkey just said, "Have I ever done this to you before?" isn't just a question. It's an indictment, a call-out, a barnyard TED Talk on trust. Balaam is still fuming, clutching his stick like it's his last ounce of authority. But you can see it in his face. The realization is creeping in that maybe he's been barking up the wrong bush, that maybe the donkey is right. And then you see it. Not just you, Balaam sees it too, the angel. Suddenly there, no longer invisible, standing directly in the path with a drawn sword gleaming like a flame. He's tall, silent, dressed in something that seems to shimmer between fabric and firelight. The donkey sees him and flattens herself to the ground again. You almost follow suit. The angel speaks. His voice isn't loud. It's quiet, measured, but it carries like thunder through your chest. "Why have you struck your donkey these 3 times? You're trying to stay composed, but it's hard to look dignified when you've just watched a donkey lecture your prophet, and now a celestial being is backing her up. I came out to oppose you," the angel continues, "because your way is perverse before me. The donkey saw me and turned away. If she hadn't, I would have killed you and let her live." Yikes. Even Balaam, who's known for being a bit performative, sinks to the ground. He mutters an apology, offers to turn back, says all the right things. But the angel lets him proceed, with one condition: only speak what God tells you. You nod slowly, because that part's gonna matter. Now, if you're wondering what exactly Balaam's deal is, how he fits into the bigger biblical picture, you're not alone. Scholars still argue whether Balaam is a villain in disguise, a tragic anti-hero, or an unwilling participant in divine satire. His story is layered with tension. He hears from God, but takes money from kings. He speaks blessings, but later gets blamed for trouble in Israel's camp. Mainstream historical fact: Balaam is one of the few figures from the Hebrew Bible also mentioned outside of it. An inscription discovered at Deir Allah in Jordan references a seer of the gods named Balaam son of Beor. Same name, same role, but written centuries later in a different cultural lens, which suggests his legend lingered far beyond this one donkey debacle. You continue the journey. The road to Moab doesn't feel so long now. Or maybe it's just that the donkey's pace has steadied again, now that there's no angel with a sword in the way. The sky is beginning to tint pink. The air smells of dry fig and olive smoke. You pass through groves and shepherd camps, through hills that watch silently, as if even the stones are waiting to see how this story ends. And you, walking behind Balaam, realize something has shifted in him too. He's quiet now. Not sulking, not scheming, just quiet, like he knows something's coming that he won't be able to control. You reach the border of Moab by dusk. Guards in bronze helmets eye you suspiciously, but they recognize the prophet. Word has spread. Messengers have been ahead of you for days. You're led into the city with minimal fanfare. Just enough to let you know they expected you. Just enough to remind you that Balak isn't the kind of king who likes to be kept waiting. And he's not thrilled. When you finally meet him, robes bright, beard waxed, crown a bit too heavy for this kind of heat, he greets Balaam with the exhausted frustration of someone who's tried everything and is now out of patience. "What took you so long?" Balak snaps, arms wide. "Did you think I couldn't reward you? I sent messengers. Important ones." Balaam holds up a hand, not with defiance, just calm. "I have come," he says, "but I can only speak what God puts in my mouth." Balak blinks. You see his jaw clench, but he nods. He doesn't understand the full story. The donkey, the angel, the sword. He just wants a curse. You, on the other hand, have a front row seat to one of the weirdest theological slow burns in Scripture. And the best part? It's not over yet. The next morning, you wake to the smell of roasted barley and tension. Balak's palace is humming with activity. Advisors bustling, servants whispering, someone adjusting a ceremonial goat harness with far too much intensity. The whole place is primed for spiritual fireworks. Today's the big day. The day Balaam climbs a hill, opens his mouth, and, if Balak gets his way, calls down the mother of all curses on Israel. But after yesterday's celestial incident, you have a hunch this won't go quite the way anyone expects. Balak greets Balaam with forced cheer. He gestures broadly to the high place where the ritual will happen, a sacred hilltop overlooking the Israelite encampment. From here, you can see everything. Tents like a sea of linen waves, smoke drifting from breakfast fires, livestock bleating, people moving like ants across the plains. Balak leads the way, robes flaring dramatically, hoping to impress. The location isn't random. In the ancient Near East, high places were considered spiritually potent, closer to the divine, removed from the noise of city life. Archaeological digs across the Levant have uncovered platforms, stone altars, and ritual implements perched on hills like this one. So from Balak's point of view, this is a smart move. A tried and true place to get things done. He's even prepared 7 altars, because if one sacrifice is good, 7 is obviously better. Bulls and rams are brought out, firewood is stacked, incense curls into the morning sky like hopeful prayers with a hint of drama. Balaam watches it all quietly. No complaints, no speeches. He performs the sacrifices as requested. Then he steps aside, head bowed, and waits. Balak, meanwhile, is practically vibrating with anticipation. Here comes the curse, he thinks. The thunder, the judgment. The prophetic verbal smackdown. You brace yourself, and Balaam speaks. But what comes out isn't wrath, it's blessing. From the top of this hill, in full view of the enemy camp, Balaam lifts his voice and says something shockingly beautiful. He praises the Israelites. He says they are set apart, that their tents are lovely, that their numbers cannot be counted, that their God is with them. Balak blinks. You blink. A bird somewhere forgets how to chirp. Balak clutches the edge of his cloak like he's about to tear it, but settles for grinding his teeth instead. "What have you done to me?" he snaps. "I brought you to curse my enemies, and you bless them instead?" Balaam shrugs, calm, almost smug. "Must I not speak what the Lord puts in my mouth?" It's a perfect moment of divine trolling. Balak throws his hands in the air. "Fine, come with me to another place. Maybe if you look at them from a different angle, you'll get the cursing part right." This is how you know Balak is desperate. He thinks maybe the problem is perspective. Like this is some kind of spiritual optical illusion. Change the view, change the outcome. So you follow them to another high place. More altars, more sacrifices, more incense. Balaam steps aside again, listens, speaks, and again, blessing. Balak is not okay. Historians still argue whether this part of the Balaam narrative is meant to satirize royal authority. Here's a king who has wealth, troops, influence, and yet can't control a prophet or the God behind him. It's divine comedy dressed up in ritual seriousness. A cosmic reminder that power doesn't guarantee results. The donkey knew that already. You shift where you stand, feeling the dry grass crunch beneath your sandals. The sun is higher now. Heat is building on the stones. Balak's face is turning the color of overripe pomegranate. He pulls Balaam aside again. "Let's try one more spot," he says through gritted teeth. Balaam nods, unfazed. You, meanwhile, are starting to enjoy this, not just because it's dramatic, but because it's revealing. Balaam isn't the one directing the message. He's a vessel now, not a voice. And for someone who used to play both sides, that's a change. You wonder what it felt like, speaking words he didn't choose, feeling them build in his chest like something living, something heavy. Words that praise a people he barely knows, that bless a future he's not part of. This isn't a speech, it's surrender. You trek to the third high place in silence. Even Balak has stopped complaining out loud. His optimism is thin. You hear him mutter to an advisor something like, "If this one doesn't work, I'm done." Sacrifices again, smoke again, birds wheeling overhead. And this time, Balaam doesn't just bless. He prophesies about Israel's future, about a star rising, about a scepter and strength and nations falling before them. It's not just praise, it's promise. Balak is finished. He throws up his hands, waves Balaam away, and stomps down the hill, muttering something about never hiring mystics again. But you stay. You're not done watching. Because you've realized something important. This story isn't about curses. It's about the power of a word when it refuses to be controlled. The hill is quiet now. Balak's entourage has retreated in a swirl of silk and indignation, leaving behind only scorched altars and the faint tang of smoke on the wind. You remain at the summit with Balaam, the donkeys grazing somewhere below, and the sky slowly stretching toward noon. You watch Balaam closely. He doesn't look victorious, not humbled either, just still, as if he's trying to understand what just passed through him. Like a man who opened his mouth expecting his usual lines and instead found poetry pouring out, a script handed down mid-performance. For someone who built his career on saying what people paid him to say, this is new territory. You take a seat on a sun-warmed rock, pulling your cloak around you as a breeze lifts a few dry leaves and sends them tumbling down the slope. Balaam hasn't moved. He stares at the horizon, not blinking, like he's watching something only he can see. And then, without ceremony, he starts speaking again. No audience, no king, just words. You lean in. This time, it's not a blessing or a curse. It's something else. An oracle. A set of riddles wrapped in imagery. He begins describing visions of nations rising and falling, of future kings and crumbling empires, of ships from distant lands and deserts turning to ash. It's like watching someone sketch the history of the next 1,000 years in broad strokes, with no explanation for how he knows any of it. And all of it pours out while the donkey quietly chews weeds in the background. Some of what Balaam says sounds strangely familiar, bits that hint at kingdom scholars will later identify as Edom, Amalek, even Greece. And yet the names are clouded in metaphor. Stars, scepters, crashing coastlines. You catch fragments, images, like pieces of a dream, remembered halfway through breakfast. Historians still argue over these verses. Were they messianic prophecies? National metaphors? Political poetry slipped into the scroll by later editors? Some claim this part of Balaam's speech foretells a future savior. Others say it's ancient international commentary disguised as divine revelation. And a few, always the fringe thinkers, insist Balaam tapped into a layer of time we don't understand, the way dreams sometimes tell you something that hasn't happened yet. You sit quietly, letting the words echo. Not because you understand them, but because they're beautiful. Eventually, Balaam falls silent again. He doesn't wait for applause, doesn't look at you, just turns slowly and begins walking back down the hill. You follow, not because you have to, because you're curious what happens next. At the base of the slope, the donkey lifts her head and blinks at Balaam. There's no drama between them anymore. No cosmic debates, no speaking roles. Just a tired prophet and a tired donkey, reunited after surviving something neither one fully understands. Balaam strokes her ear once before mounting again, and you continue on, not back toward Israel, not toward Balak's palace, just forward, through olive groves and dry gullies, past travelers with baskets of pomegranates and linen merchants arguing over prices. No one pays you much attention now, just another dusty trio on a road that keeps going. You reflect on how this all began, an invitation from a fearful king, a reluctant prophet, a divine warning delivered by a stubborn donkey, and yet somehow you've ended up here, with a collection of unsought blessings, mysterious forecasts, and a deep sense that you've witnessed something bigger than curses or ceremonies. Balaam eventually stops at a crossroads. There's a fork. One path heads toward the edge of Moab, the other leads north into unknown hills. He doesn't speak, just waits. You realize this is where your path might diverge from his. He said what he needed to say, done what he was allowed to do. But what comes next? That's blurry. Scholars note that Balaam's story doesn't get a happy ending in the biblical narrative. Later, he's associated with the downfall of some Israelites, blamed for a moment of temptation and judgment. Whether that was the same Balaam or a legendary echo of him is still up for debate. Some say he returned to Moab with a hidden agenda. Others believe he wandered off quietly, trying to make peace with what he'd seen and what he couldn't change. You stand at the fork with him, and for a long moment no one moves. Then Balaam nudges the donkey forward. He takes the left path, disappearing slowly into the light-dappled trees. And you stay behind, not because the road ahead is closed, but because somehow you've learned what you needed to. It just took a talking donkey, a few blessings, and the most reluctant prophet in the region to show you. You stay at the fork for a while, just breathing. The dust settles from Balaam's departure. The donkey's faint hoofbeats fade. The sky above has shifted, less searing now, with late-day gold catching in the scrub branches. You don't feel urgency to move. You feel like you're meant to linger. You glance down the road Balaam took. There's no dramatic send-off, no thunderclap, just a man and a beast quietly slipping back into obscurity, leaving behind a trail of riddles and blessings. Eventually you start walking again, not because you know where you're going, but because that's what people do after stories refuse to end cleanly. Your feet crunch over gravel and your thoughts spiral the way thoughts do when you're tired but not ready to sleep. You can't stop replaying that donkey's voice, clear, reasonable, gently indignant. Have I ever done this to you before? That line lives rent-free in your brain now. It's funny how many moments in ancient stories hinge on someone, or something, finally speaking up. You think about other strange biblical conversations. A serpent in Eden, a burning bush, a raven sent from the ark. God seems to have a habit of putting profound truth into unexpected mouths. Mainstream historical fact. In Mesopotamian and Egyptian literature, animals sometimes functioned as divine messengers or symbols, but rarely were they granted full-on dialogue. That talking donkey in the Balaam story? She's one of a kind, the only speaking animal in the Hebrew Bible outside of Eden, which makes her brief moment of speech feel even more intentional, even more sacred. And what did she use her one moment for? Not poetry, not prophecy, just clarity. She asked a question, called out mistreatment, gently reminded a so-called spiritual authority that actions should make sense and trust should be earned. You pass a shepherd resting beneath a tree. His goats are napping in tangled piles. He nods at you sleepily, more goat than man in his posture. You nod back. Words aren't necessary here. Your journey winds toward a small outpost, one of those dusty places that has a single well, a fig tree, and a man trying to sell dried fish that looks older than the local walls. You don't stop. You're not in the mood for bartering. But the image of Balaam stays with you. Not just the man himself, but his strange moral middle ground. He wasn't a villain, not exactly, but he wasn't a saint either. He obeyed, but with conditions. He listened to God, but kept checking to see if God might change his mind. He gave blessings when required, but did so with the energy of someone caught between fear and obligation. Scholars still debate Balaam's sincerity. Was he genuinely trying to follow divine instructions, or just preserving his own skin? Was his obedience humble submission or strategic compliance? And what do we do with the rest of his legacy? Because here's the twist. Later in the biblical story, Balaam gets blamed for a massive spiritual failure. The Israelites fall into idolatry, and someone points a finger at Balaam, saying he's the one who suggested it. That maybe he didn't curse them directly, but left behind a dangerous suggestion or two. You feel the weight of that ambiguity. The talking donkey may have saved his life, but not necessarily his legacy. The path narrows as you move into a wooded ravine. It's cooler here. The cicadas soften their buzz. Your sandals slip once on a loose patch of stones, but you catch yourself muttering under your breath. You smile at the sound. That muttering, very Balaam of you. You can't help but reflect on how human this prophet feels. Not because of his miracles, but because of his motives. He's conflicted, hesitant. He wants the perks of obedience without the discomfort. He wants spiritual clarity, but also options. And yet, God speaks through him, again and again. Not because Balaam deserves it, but because sometimes the message matters more than the messenger. You pause near a tree with peeling bark, leaning against it while you drink the last of your water. The leather flask squeaks softly. The sun filters through in dappled shafts. You spot a bird overhead, just a little brown thing, hopping nervously from twig to twig. Watching you like it might file a report later. You think about that phrase, should I not care about that great city? It wasn't spoken in this story, but it fits. Shouldn't God care about kings who fear curses, about prophets who fumble truth, about donkeys who see what others miss? Shouldn't God care even when the motives are messy, the obedience imperfect, the outcomes unresolved? You sit on a rock that's still warm from the afternoon heat and watch a beetle scale a blade of grass like it's Everest. You realize something. No curses fell today. No thrones crumbled. No lightning struck. Just a donkey that talked. A prophet who listened. And a blessing that snuck through anyway. You wake the next morning before the sun crests the horizon, lying flat beneath a thorny acacia tree, your back imprinted with the outlines of 3 small rocks and 1 extremely judgmental stick bug. The air is soft and cool, briefly forgiving before the desert heat resumes its reign. You roll onto your side and squint into the quiet. There's no sound of cities, no altar smoke, no braying donkey, just you, the land, and a sky just beginning to yawn itself pink. And still, the donkey's voice echoes in your head. Not literally. She's not galloping through your dreams, reciting poetry, but something about the cadence, the conviction, won't let go. Have I ever done this to you before? It wasn't just a defense. It was a reminder, a record of loyalty, and somehow it lands heavier than Balaam's lofty blessings or Balak's royal demands. The donkey's question cuts straight through the noise of the entire story. You sit up, brushing off red dust that's now part of your personality, and start walking again, slowly, as if the desert might whisper something back if you give it space. And then your mind goes back, further than the donkey, further than Balaam, back to the beginning of the job offer. Balak, king of Moab, pacing behind fortress walls, staring down the Israelite camp like it's a living prophecy he doesn't want to come true. He saw the Israelites from afar and thought, nope, too many, too blessed, too dangerous. So he calls Balaam, not because Balaam was local, but because his reputation was international. Balaam, son of Beor, known in divination circles as a man whose blessings and curses had bite, the kind of guy you bring in when swords and treaties don't work. Fringe researchers often note that Balaam may have been a professional seer with credentials in multiple kingdoms, like the Bronze Age equivalent of a freelance consultant with 5-star reviews and questionable ethics. Balak sends messengers, gifts in hand, flattery in their mouths, and Balaam, to his credit, doesn't say yes right away. He says he'll ask God, and God says no, flat out, don't go, don't curse. Israel is blessed, which should have been the end. But it wasn't. Because Balaam didn't slam the door. He left it cracked. He told the messengers, "Even if Balak gave me his house full of silver and gold, I couldn't go against God's word, but stay the night, and I'll ask again." And that little but, that single loophole, is where the whole mess began. You step around a scorpion sunning itself on a warm stone and think, it's always the loopholes. God relents, in a way. He tells Balaam, "Go with them, but only do what I say." Which sounds permissive until you realize it's a test, not of obedience, but of trust. Would Balaam walk the road honestly? Would he listen closely or lean on profit and pressure? Cue the angel. The donkey. The weirdest roadside therapy session in biblical history. And now here you are, rewalking the story with sore calves and a fresh appreciation for divine comic timing. As you walk, you pass a fig vendor setting up her stall by a narrow stream. She nods at you and flicks her head toward her goat, which has somehow managed to climb into a tree and looks quite proud of itself. You buy a fig, it's underripe, you eat it anyway. Because really, when your spiritual guide is a donkey, and your path is lined with curses that become blessings, an unripe fig is just part of the mood. You find a shady ledge and sit down, legs swinging over the edge. Below you, the land stretches out, golden ridges, green valleys, paths that intersect and disappear. You try to imagine what it was like for Balaam, hearing words pour from his mouth that he didn't write, words that ran upstream against the current of the job he'd been hired to do, words he may not have even believed fully, but couldn't stop once they began. That's the thing about prophecy. It isn't always polished, it isn't always comfortable, and it almost never fits cleanly into agendas. It just shows up, sometimes in dreams, sometimes in oracles, sometimes in donkeys. Historians still puzzle over this part of the tale. Why God would use Balaam at all. Why a Moabite hired diviner known for towing the spiritual fence would be entrusted with one of the clearest declarations of Israel's blessing outside of Moses. Some say it's a lesson in sovereignty, that God can speak through anyone, even the morally mid-tier. Others see it as a cosmic joke, God letting a non-Israelite deliver blessings just to confuse the political class. And some believe it's about grace, that the truth isn't limited by who we expect to carry it. You lie back, letting your eyes drift skyward. A hawk wheels lazily above you. Somewhere a bee debates a thistle. The fig sits in your stomach like a question mark, and for a while you don't move, because this part is the pause, the place where the story breathes before it turns again. The sun has climbed higher now, warm but not yet punishing. You're still on the ledge, watching the hills shift color in the light, the sky stretching endlessly above like parchment waiting for a message. Somewhere behind you, the world continues. Markets open, animals bray, sandals scuff down dirt roads, but up here it's just you and the afterglow of a story that refuses to behave. And now, your thoughts turn back to the moment everything changed. Not the donkey, not even the angel, but that eerie, subtle shift when Balaam's own words betrayed him. Because he didn't expect to bless Israel, not really. Sure, he'd agreed to speak only what God gave him, but deep down, he was hoping, maybe, that God would shift course, that he'd earn his reward, deliver a compelling curse, and leave with both his reputation and his wallet improved. Instead, he opened his mouth, and out came praise. That's the moment. That's the one. You picture the scene. Balaam standing on the ridge, arms lifted, eyes glazed in holy focus, while Balak practically holds his breath below. And then Balaam says something like, "How can I curse those whom God has not cursed?" And you imagine Balak going red. The man wanted fire and fury, and instead he got a poetic travel brochure for Israel's future. You shift your weight, brushing grit from your robe, and smile to yourself. There's something satisfying about Balak's frustration. Not because you dislike him, he's really just trying to survive in a volatile region, but because he's learning in real time that the divine doesn't run on request. That no matter how many bulls you offer, some truths refuse to bend. Mainstream historical fact. The Israelites were seen by surrounding nations not just as a military threat, but a religious anomaly. Their God was personal, singular, and disturbingly effective. So when Balak wanted curses, he wasn't just asking for military advantage, he was attempting theological sabotage. He wanted the God of Israel to reverse course, to revoke the blessing. Which, in hindsight, is kind of hilarious, because Balaam ends up reinforcing the blessing with style. And still, Balak tries again and again. Different hills, different angles, different sacrifices. He changes everything except the one thing that matters: God's will. Eventually, Balaam stops playing along, and this is the part you've been circling. The part that's been nudging at your brain like a goat asking for dates. The final blessing. It's no longer just a passive no to curses. It's a full-on, fire-up-the-choir prophecy. You remember how he said it: a star will come out of Jacob, a scepter will rise out of Israel. That line echoes. It's echoed for thousands of years. You don't have to be a scholar to know why people still argue about it. Some read it as a prophecy of King David. Others see in it a messianic shadow, a future redeemer, a light rising from unlikely beginnings. And still others say, no, this is just Bronze Age poetry, nationalistic hope, political metaphor. But you? You're here, on this ledge, with that phrase still in the air. A star will rise. And something in you believes it means more than one thing. Because prophecy doesn't always pick one target. It fires into time like a comet, visible in one moment, but leaving a trail that lingers and loops through eras. You sit up, bones complaining gently, and begin walking again. The trail curves along the ridge, lined with thorn brush and dry grass. The donkey's path, maybe. You picture her walking it, steady, slow, eyes half-lidded but wise beyond her hooves. You miss her a little. Funny how the animal most people wrote off turned out to be the clearest voice in the whole story. You remember her logic. Have I ever done this to you before? And you wonder if that's what God was saying too. Have I ever led you wrong? Have I ever blessed without purpose? You pass a shrine carved into the side of a rock. Ancient, weathered, long since abandoned. There's a hollow where offerings were once placed. You kneel briefly, touch the stone. It's cool, cracked, still carrying memory. You whisper, not a prayer exactly, more like agreement, a kind of thanks, because you're starting to understand the heart of this tale. It's not about curses that failed, it's about a blessing that insisted on being spoken. Even through a reluctant prophet, even from the mouth of a donkey, even when no one wanted to hear it. You head downhill now, toward a stand of acacia trees that shiver in the breeze like they know things. Your steps feel lighter, not because you've reached a destination, but because you finally stopped trying to control the direction. You let the story carry you. Let it unfold at its strange, gentle pace. And as the path opens up to a wide, sunlit stretch of earth, you realize some stories don't need resolution. They just need to be heard. The acacia trees open like a gateway as you descend, their crooked branches casting thin shadows that twitch across the path like sleepy dancers. You follow them, your feet brushing through dry grass, sandals dusted in the soft red of Moabite soil. The air smells of warm bark and something sweet, maybe figs, maybe wild thyme. You hear voices ahead before you see the figures. Not loud, measured, low. A king's voice, trying not to sound frustrated, and Balaam's voice, calm, deliberate, already tired of being polite. You edge closer and peek through the branches. There they are. Balak, king of Moab, pacing like a man trying to keep his temper from boiling over, and Balaam, seated under a small linen canopy, pouring water into a shallow bowl and pretending he can't feel the tension in the air. The king speaks first. You promised to come when I summoned you. You promised to help. And now, 3 times, you've blessed the very people I asked you to curse. Balaam doesn't look up. I told you I could only speak what God tells me to say. Balak waves a hand toward the hills. Fine, go home then. I'll give you nothing. Not a coin, not a goat, not even a bowl of raisins, which is harsh because raisins were a big deal back then. You stay hidden in the trees watching because this moment feels important. It's not the fireworks kind of important, no angels, no sword, but the quieter kind. The kind where someone could choose to say nothing and says something anyway. Because Balaam doesn't leave. Not immediately. Instead, he stands, brushes the dust from his robe, and looks at Balak with that strange faraway expression that always seems to follow prophecy. "There's more," he says. Balak rolls his eyes. "There's always more with you." Balaam speaks, and what comes next isn't about Israel, it's about the world, about nations rising and falling, about the edges of empires beginning to smolder before they've even reached their peak, about the distant descendants of distant kings. Ships coming from western lands, cities consumed by fire, kingdoms swallowed by time. He speaks of Amalek, the first among nations, but destined for ruin. He speaks of the Kenites, once secure in rocky heights but not beyond reach. He speaks of waves crashing on proud shores, of cries that echo from coastlines that haven't even been charted yet. You catch only fragments, but they chill you. Not because they're violent, but because they're true. Even now, so many centuries later, you know how those names played out. You've read the ruins, you've seen the pottery shards, the temple fragments, the inscriptions carved into stone by hands that thought their names would never fade. But they did. And Balaam, this odd, wandering prophet who talked to a donkey and disappointed a king, saw it all coming. Historians still debate the structure of these final oracles. Some say they were added later, a kind of literary flourish to elevate Balaam's importance. Others believe he really did speak them, that this man, who almost got himself killed by an angel, was given one more glimpse into the cosmic map. But everyone agrees, this is not the voice of a man speaking for money. This is something else. You shift your weight and crack a twig. Both men glance toward the trees. You duck. Too late, but thankfully no one investigates. Balak is already distracted. The prophecy is over. Balaam bows his head slightly and turns to leave. No farewell, no demand for compensation, just a quiet exit from a story that no longer needs him. You follow, as silently as you can, watching as he retrieves his donkey, who's been napping in the shade with the serene expression of someone who's seen things and chosen peace. They start down the road together, and you trail behind, far enough not to intrude, close enough to witness. And this is when the strangest thought hits you. You expected Balaam's story to end with triumph or disgrace. Instead, it ends with neither. It just ends. No celebration, no collapse. Just a man and his donkey fading into the hills, his words left echoing behind him. You pause on the trail, letting them go. There's a fork ahead again. One path leads toward the plains, where Israel still camps in the distance. Fires burning low, tents casting long shadows. The other leads back to the mountains, where you came from, where the echoes still hum. You stand there a while, not moving, because some stories end quietly, and sometimes that's the most sacred ending of all. You take the fork toward the plains. The trail is sun-washed and quiet, bordered by tufts of dry grass and the occasional scraggly shrub that looks like it gave up sometime last year. Your sandals scuff the dirt with soft, steady rhythm. With every step, the camp of Israel draws closer, still distant, but no longer just a cloud of linen on the horizon. You don't go to join them. You're not part of their story, not directly. You're just orbiting it, like a moon following a planet it can't quite reach. But you feel drawn anyway, drawn by the weight of what's been said, what's been blessed. You crest a small ridge, and the view opens. Tents. So many tents. They're arranged in careful clusters, tribes nested like families, with order that somehow looks spontaneous from this distance. Smoke curls up from cooking fires. You see figures moving, hauling water, untangling rope, arguing softly over something like goat placement. It looks from here peaceful, purposeful. But you know better. These people, they're complicated. They argue, they complain, they forget things at absolutely the worst times. They doubt their leaders. They make idols out of earrings and excuses out of everything else. And yet they are blessed. That's what Balaam said. Not because of their behavior, but in spite of it. And that, more than anything, is what rattled Balak. You sit on a boulder, shaded by a bush pretending to be a tree, and think through it again. Balak's plan had been simple. If Israel was too strong for swords, maybe words could do the trick. Maybe a divine curse would weaken their defenses. Maybe if their blessing was reversed, they'd be just another ragtag camp of wanderers, easily scattered. But Balaam didn't curse them. Couldn't, because the blessing wasn't his to revoke. It was already embedded, stitched into the narrative from long before Moab even existed. That's the power of a covenant. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient covenants weren't casual. They weren't terms and conditions you could scroll past. They were blood-bound, oath-sealed, identity-shaping declarations. When God blessed Abraham, when he renewed that blessing with Isaac and Jacob, when he brought the Israelites out of Egypt, it wasn't just poetic language. It was a declaration of belonging. A bond stronger than fear, than kings, than even curses. You pick up a smooth stone and turn it in your hand. It's warm from the sun, heavy enough to matter. You toss it once and catch it. Then again, because this is the part of the story that lingers. Not the angel, not the donkey, not even Balaam's surprisingly beautiful monologues. It's the idea that a blessing can be locked in, unstealable, and that unsettles people. It unsettled Balak. He didn't understand a God who wouldn't be swayed by bribes or sacrifices. He didn't understand a prophet who wouldn't cooperate, though, to be fair, neither did the prophet himself half the time. You stand again and stretch, your spine cracking like an old scroll. The breeze carries the distant smell of lentils, sweat, and something vaguely herbal. You make your way down the slope, keeping a respectful distance from the outer ring of tents, and then you see them. Children playing near a well, a girl chasing a boy with a fig in one hand, a clay jug sloshing water in the other. A goat bleats dramatically and almost topples a basket of onions. An older woman sits nearby, hands busy with a torn hem, humming a tune you don't recognize. You stay at the edge of the clearing, unnoticed. Not spying, just watching. And something softens in you. Because this is what the blessings were about. Not empires, not battles, not prophetic drama. Just people, living, learning, laughing, making a mess of things, but trying anyway. You think again of Balaam's final words, about stars and scepters and the rise and fall of nations. All of it important, all of it far above the heads of these children playing in the dirt. But somehow the future Balaam glimpsed, the hope he spoke of, starts here. In scenes like this, in ordinary holiness. You turn away quietly, leaving them to their joy. You don't need to stay longer. You've seen enough to know the prophecy wasn't just pretty words echoing into nowhere. It was rooted in something real, something tangible, something worth protecting. As you climb back toward the ridgeline, the wind shifts again, carrying a whisper of voices. Someone starting a song, the rhythm of work, the murmur of prayers rising like the smoke from their fires. And for the first time in a long time, you don't need a divine voice or a talking animal to remind you of something sacred. You just need to listen. By now, the road feels familiar beneath your feet. Not because you've been here before, but because this part of the story walks with you like an old friend. The sharp edges have softened. The dust no longer irritates. Even the heat has stopped trying to win. You follow the curve of a dry ravine, the kind that only pretends to be a stream bed during the rainy season. Tiny birds flit from bush to bush. A lizard stares at you suspiciously from atop a rock, then vanishes like he's late for something. And that's when you hear it. Footsteps behind you. You turn slowly. It's Balaam. Again, not in a dramatic surprise twist way. He just appears, like someone circling back to a conversation he didn't quite finish. His robes are dustier now, his expression unreadable. He doesn't speak at first, just stands near you on the trail, watching the horizon. You walk together in silence for a while, the kind of silence that has weight, not awkwardness. Eventually, he clears his throat. I told him I was leaving, he says almost to himself. Told Balak I wouldn't say another word. You nod, seems reasonable. But I've been thinking, he continues, not just about Israel, about everyone else. You glance over. His face is shaded by the low sun, but his voice carries something different now. Not weariness, not ambition, conviction. I saw something, he says, when I was up there. Something bigger than Israel, bigger than Moab, something still a long way off. He doesn't explain further. You get the sense he couldn't even if he tried. The images in his mind are too large, too layered. He kicks a pebble down the path and sighs. I'm not a hero in this story, he admits. You agree silently. But I said what I was told. That has to count for something. It does. You want to tell him the donkey thinks so too, but now doesn't feel like the right moment. Mainstream historical fact: Balaam is one of the most puzzling figures in biblical literature. He's one of the only prophets outside the Israelite tradition to be granted that title. And while he's not exactly celebrated, he's also not entirely condemned until much later when his name shows up in a very different context. You ask him gently, what comes next? He chuckles. Not more prophecy, I hope. But the truth is more complicated, because as you recall, the story of Balaam doesn't end with his blessings. At some point after he disappears from Balak's court, he re-enters the narrative from an unexpected angle. You think about that footnote buried deep in the scroll, how the Israelites later fall into idolatry, how they're seduced by Moabite practices, how someone suggested that if you couldn't curse Israel from the outside, maybe you could tempt them from the inside. And the finger, eventually, points to Balaam. Was it true? Did he offer Balak that strategy after all? Out of bitterness? Spite? A desperate attempt to stay relevant? Scholars still debate it. Some say it was a later interpolation, a way of cleaning up the moral loose ends of the story. Others argue that it fits, that a man so torn between obedience and ambition might eventually compromise when it was convenient. You don't ask him. Not now, not here. Because this Balaam, the one beside you, isn't the villain of the tale. He's just tired, and maybe a little haunted. You pause at a bend in the trail where the land splits again, one path back toward the ridge, the other leading downward into the valleys of Moab. Balaam stops too. This is where we part, he says. You nod. You'll be remembered, you say, even if no one agrees how. He smiles, a quiet, crooked thing. Just don't let him forget the donkey. You promise. And then he walks away. Not dramatically. No trumpet fanfare. No sudden burst of light. Just a man and his shadow fading into the last light of the day. You stand there a while longer, letting the dust settle, the silence return. And somewhere in that stillness, you feel it. The story's not over. Not Balaam's. Not Israel's. Not yours. Because the blessings, they linger. They ripple outward. And the words, the ones Balaam never meant to speak, the ones he couldn't not say, they're still echoing. They're part of something now. Something stitched into the fabric of this wandering, imperfect, stubbornly hopeful people. A people chosen. A people blessed. And whether Balaam understood it or not, he helped carry that truth, one oracle at a time. You're alone again, which feels both quieter and heavier than before. The trail dips into a shallow valley and disappears behind low hills, the kind of place where shadows settle early and sound travels far. You hear a crow somewhere in the distance, cawing with theatrical menace, then going quiet, as if it realized it was being too dramatic. The heat has broken. Evening is settling in. You keep walking. And you start to wonder. What happened after Balaam vanished? Not just the dramatic parts, the downfall of Moab, the strange scandal involving Israel, the name drop in later scriptures, but the in-between. Did he ever look back? Did he regret it? Did the donkey get a retirement plan? Because there's something unfinished about him. He wasn't Jonah, running from the call. He wasn't Moses, carrying the weight of a nation. Balaam was other, tangled, not unspiritual, but not surrendered, not evil, but not quite trustworthy either. He was the kind of person you don't build stained glass windows for, but you still remember him. Because sometimes, it's the flawed figures who reveal the clearest truths. You crest a hill and pause. The land is golden now, bathed in that soft, theatrical light that makes everything feel symbolic. You squint toward the horizon and imagine the Israelites still camped below, unaware of the oracles being spoken in their name, unaware that a king tried to curse them, unaware that a donkey had to intervene. You think about all the things that shape a people, wars, covenants, long walks in circles, and how sometimes it's the things they never see that shape them the most. A blessing spoken over them while they're sleeping, a prophet delivering poetry instead of poison, a God who won't be bribed, edited, or pushed into contradiction. That's what sticks with you. Not just that God defended his people, but how he did it, quietly, subtly, almost behind the scenes, like grace hiding in plain sight. You sit on a warm rock, unwrap a bit of leftover bread, and tear it slowly. A lizard eyes you from a crevice. You toss it a crumb, and it blinks, an act that somehow feels deeply judgmental and disappears. And again you remember the donkey, not just what she said, but how she said it. So calm, so logical, no thunder, no prophecy voice, just a creature trying to tell the truth in the only way she knew how. Have I ever done this to you before? In that moment, she wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for every underestimated voice, every small creature ignored until it says something that can't be dismissed. You wonder how many other truths have been missed because they weren't wrapped in importance, because they came from mouths we don't expect. Fringe scholars love that detail, that the most profound insight in the Balaam story doesn't come from a divine cloudburst or a king's decree, or even the prophet himself. It comes from a donkey who simply noticed. And that, they argue, might be the point. That revelation doesn't always roar. Sometimes it mutters, sometimes it sighs, sometimes it shuffles its hooves and stares at you until you finally ask what's wrong. You finish the bread and brush the crumbs from your lap. The shadows stretch longer now. You feel the first cool sigh of night settle in the valley below. And you think about the blessings, how they began as curses, how they carried a rhythm Balaam didn't plan. How beautiful are your tents, O Jacob. You try to imagine the Israelites hearing those words for the first time, not from their own priests, not from Moses, but from an outsider, a hired voice turned divine instrument. That blessing traveled far. It echoed into the Psalms, into liturgy, into generations who didn't know who Balaam was, but remembered his words. You stand again, not because you're ready to leave, but because stories like this don't let you stay still for long. They itch at your feet. They invite movement. And this one, this wandering, absurd, deeply sacred tale, is still unfolding, even without its prophet, even without its donkey, even in the silence. You walk a little slower now, not because you're tired, but because you're listening. Just in case a bush wants to burn, or a goat wants to quote scripture, or a breeze wants to say something that sounds like grace, because the world, you realize, is never quite done speaking, especially when you finally learn to hear it. You leave the ridge behind and make your way back into lower ground, where the path curves through open fields brushed with golden dusk. The sky is softening now, slipping into that in-between color. Lavender on the edges, amber at the core. Even the insects buzz slower, as if the whole world is starting to exhale. Your legs ache a little, but it's the good kind of ache, the kind that tells you you've gone somewhere. And still, Balaam lingers in your thoughts. You can't shake the fact that his final act in the narrative isn't final. Because yes, he walked away. Yes, he blessed instead of cursed. But then there's that shadow, that whisper in later texts, that maybe he didn't stay gone. That maybe, after all that, he helped engineer Israel's fall. You pause beneath a crooked tree whose bark peels like old scrolls. You think about how this story would have felt if it ended with Balaam simply riding off into legend, the flawed prophet who got it right in the end. But that's not what happens. In the book of Numbers, not long after the donkey, the altars, the blessings, Israel stumbles. They fall into temptation, into idol worship, seduced by Moabite women and Moabite gods. It's messy, painful, a spiritual landslide. And tucked inside that fallout is a line, barely a sentence. These were the ones who followed the advice of Balaam. There it is, the twist. The possibility that Balaam, unable to curse from without, whispered a strategy to destroy from within. Historians still debate whether that line reflects an actual event or a theological attempt to pin a complex failure on a convenient outsider. Some argue it was inserted later, retroactively assigning blame. Others say it fits, that Balaam, rejected and disgraced, lashed out the only way he knew how. Either way, it complicates things. You step carefully across a patch of cracked earth, watching for snakes that might be finishing their evening commute. And you wonder, does that undo the blessings? Do beautiful words lose their power if the speaker turns ugly? You sit on a fallen log and let that question settle beside you like a companion. It doesn't answer itself. Because Scripture is full of tension like this, stories with blurred lines and unfinished arcs. People who obey for the wrong reasons, or disobey and still find grace. Saints who stumble, sinners who shine for a second before vanishing into obscurity. It's never neat, never easy, and maybe that's what makes it sacred. You look up and see stars beginning to appear, just the faintest pinpricks. Early risers testing the waters of twilight. You think of Balaam's words again, a star will rise out of Jacob. That star hasn't stopped rising, even if its first witness fell short. You brush the dust from your robe and rise again, this time walking without watching your feet. Your mind is elsewhere, on the tension between the words Balaam spoke and the choices he made, between obedience and compromise, between clarity and confusion. You remember the donkey. Remember how she saw the danger when Balaam didn't. And you wonder, if the donkey could speak again, what would she say about what came next? Would she mourn it? Would she say he almost got it right? Or maybe she'd say what she said before. Have I ever done this to you before? A reminder that past behavior matters, that patterns mean something. But also maybe that change is possible, even if it's brief. You pass a dry riverbed and spot a child herding sheep in the distance. He's barefoot, humming tunelessly, waving his arms like someone negotiating with the wind. The sheep don't seem impressed, but they follow. You smile, because even now the land still holds stories. Even now, the echoes of blessings still live in these hills, etched into the stones, carried in the dust. And even if Balaam's legacy is tangled, the words he spoke were not lies. They were true. They are true. Because the truth doesn't need a perfect vessel. It just needs a willing one, even if only for a moment. Even if that moment is interrupted by a talking donkey and cut short by a choice made in the shadows. You walk on, not because you know how it ends, but because some stories aren't meant to end. They're meant to stay with you, to provoke, to whisper, to follow, like a trail of blessings that refuses to be forgotten. The stars are out now, no longer scattered specks, but confident and clear, stitched across the sky like tiny beads in an old priest's robe. The road is pale beneath the moonlight, and your footsteps sound softer than they did earlier. The air has cooled. It smells of stone and dry grass and something like possibility. You're walking slowly now, not from weariness, but because the pace feels right. This is reflection time, digesting time. The stretch of the story where the loud parts have passed and all that's left is the hum underneath. And in that hum, you start thinking about the donkey again. Because let's be honest, she's the most trustworthy character in this entire saga. She saw what Balaam didn't. She spoke what others wouldn't, and then, just as suddenly, she stopped, returned to silence. went back to being a regular donkey with an exceptional resume. She didn't ask for thanks, didn't seek out a second act. She just did her job, told the truth, and walked on. That's rare. Mainstream scholars have long wrestled with the narrative function of the donkey. Was she just a vehicle for comic relief? A divine mouthpiece? A test of Balaam's spiritual sensitivity? Some say she represents the voice of creation, God's ability to speak through anything. Others see her as a narrative device, there to humiliate Balaam, to bring low a man who thought he held authority over all things, only to be corrected by the animal he beat. But you? You think she's more than a symbol. You think she's a teacher. A quiet, stubborn, necessary interruption. And the older you get, the more you understand how valuable that is. How rare it is to be interrupted by something true. Something inconvenient, unscripted, and right. You pause to sit beneath a low, crooked fig tree. Its branches hang heavy, silhouetted against the stars. The figs aren't ripe, but they smell sweet. You lean back against the trunk and let the memory of this whole strange journey press gently against you. You remember Balak pacing like a man betrayed by the divine. You remember Balaam, eyes wide with wonder, blessing when he meant to curse. You remember the altars, the awkward sacrifices. The moment the words came out wrong, but were actually right. And you remember the silence that followed, the long, echoing space where Balaam could have walked away clean, but didn't. You feel the weight of that, not as judgment, just as warning, that even those given glimpses of heaven can still stumble in the dust, that speaking truth once doesn't guarantee you'll keep speaking it. You look up at the stars again. They haven't moved. The same sky Balaam looked at from his high places. The same stars that watched Israel sleep in their tents. The same sky that hung above Moab when the king first began his scheming. It's comforting in a way. That the world keeps turning. That grace keeps echoing, even when the messengers fall short. You rise again, stretch your back, and start walking one last time. The path curves gently downward now, toward a cluster of acacia trees where crickets are tuning up for the night. You pass under their branches like a pilgrim crossing a threshold, the hush of the world settling into your skin. And as you walk, you repeat the line you can't shake. How beautiful are your tents, O Jacob. Not your tents, not your words, but you borrow them anyway, because they feel right, because they still bless, because somehow they still hold weight. You think of all the people who've recited those words through centuries of worship, war, wandering, all the scribes who copied them by candlelight, the readers who whispered them in fear or awe or hope. They don't remember Balaam. Not really, but they remember the blessing. They remember the voice of God echoing through the mouth of a reluctant man, and before that, through a loyal donkey. They remember the surprise of mercy, the defiance of grace, the stubborn refusal of heaven to curse what it has already called good. And you? You'll remember too. Not as a story tied with a bow, but as one that slipped under your skin and stayed. The final stretch of road is quiet. The kind of quiet that feels chosen, not empty, but settled. Like the land has exhaled and tucked itself in. You walk slower now. Not because you're tired, though you are, but because something about this moment feels full, final. A page you're not quite ready to turn. You reach a rise in the path where the ground flattens and the view opens. Below, the hills roll gently toward the edge of Moabite territory, fading into shadow where the stars begin to reclaim their kingdom. A shepherd's fire glows faintly in the far distance, just enough to remind you you're not alone in this world. You sit, because sometimes the end of a story deserves stillness. And this one, this strange tale of blessings, beasts, and divine interruptions, has been anything but ordinary. You think back over every moment, every odd detour. The king who tried to control God with bribes. The prophet who heard God's voice but kept checking for loopholes. The donkey who saw more than the man riding her. The blessings that wouldn't stay silent, even when spoken by reluctant lips. The part that stays with you most, though, isn't the drama, not the angel with the sword, not the curses that became praises, not even the talking donkey, though yes, that one will come up at parties. It's the realization that truth came from the places no one expected, from mouths no one thought would matter, from a voice trying to stop a man from destroying himself. That's what lingers. That and the quiet miracle of a blessing that held firm. No matter who tried to undo it, no matter what pressure came, no matter who was watching. You glance up at the stars again. That line still echoes. A star shall rise out of Jacob. Was it political, poetic, messianic? Historians still argue about that one. Some say it referred to King David, who would crush Israel's enemies and unite the tribes. Others think it looked further forward, toward someone more eternal. A different kind of king. One with sandals caked in dust and eyes like fire. Someone who would come quietly like a whisper in the night. You don't know for sure, but something in that phrase feels permanent, like it doesn't belong to just one moment, like it's still rising. And Balaam? The man who saw it first? He may not have followed the light, he may have lost his way after the story left him behind, but for one moment he carried it, held it, spoke it, and that counts. You lean back on your elbows and let the earth cradle you. A breeze passes, cool and dry. The fig tree behind you rustles gently, and a single leaf drifts down, twirling like it's making a point. You watch it settle beside you. Nothing dramatic, just enough. Because maybe that's the lesson in all of this. That being part of something sacred doesn't require perfection, just presence. Balaam didn't plan to bless. The donkey didn't audition to speak, but both of them showed up. Both of them played their part. And somewhere in their tangled, dusty, bewildering journey, something holy took shape. And now, it's your turn to walk back through the world. Maybe you won't have visions. Maybe your animals will remain refreshingly silent. But you've heard the story now. You carry its weight, its absurdity, its grace, its quiet insistence that truth, real, divine truth, can slip through the cracks of even the most reluctant hearts, even yours. So take it with you, not like a command, not like a sermon, like a seed. Let it root quietly, whispering that blessings are stubborn, grace is sneaky, and sometimes the most sacred moments come when we stop pretending to have it all figured out. And now, as the hills darken into full night and the world folds itself under the weight of stars, ye rest. The voices of kings and prophets fade into silence. The donkey is somewhere far off now, chewing contentedly beneath a different fig tree. Her job is done. The oracles have been spoken. The roads have been walked. There is nothing left to prove. You lie back fully, letting the ground hold you, not perfectly flat, but steady enough. The wind brushes gently over your face like a lullaby. A small insect hums a single note beside your ear, then moves on. Even that tiny life knows it's time for sleep. The stars shimmer above, unhurried, unchanged. They blink like soft reminders that you are small but seen, that stories are still unfolding, that somewhere in the echo of blessing, your name is known. Breathe slower now. Let your chest rise like a hill and fall like a prayer. Let your jaw unclench. Let your shoulders soften. No more oracles, no more questions, just quiet. You are not here to fix Nineveh or Moab or even yourself. You are here to rest, to let the story wash over you, then drift gently away. So go ahead, close your eyes. Let the blessing rise like a star behind your ribs. You are loved, you are kept, you are home. Sweet dreams.